Okay, as we were talking about earlier, white space is stripped out in HTML, and XML it's preserved. So here we have our Neil Young example again, and if I put all these spaces in there, that white space will be preserved. In HTML, it would be stripped out. So just be careful with that. If you don't need a space there, don't put it in. Obviously, you need a space there. Um, just be mindful of that. The other thing that you want to be careful with is that um, when you're marking up a document, the Rusty Herald reading really gets at this quite well, is that say you're writing a poem and you're kind of going into kind of Microsoft Word or like typewriter mode, and you're thinking, oh well, this is a poem and I want it to read nicely, so I have a carriage return here to format it nicely and say, oh, I don't want fill there, I want it there, and let's do this. Um, and you're trying to make it so that the reader is only reading the poem as they would and have carriage returns and so forth. When this goes through a browser, it will get all read as one line. It'll all look like this, and it'll format it to whatever the browser's at. I'm not going to do this for all of it, but you get the idea here that basically if the monitor is 5 feet wide, it'll read it as one line. If it's 3 inches wide on, like, say, your iPhone or whatever, it'll make it so it fits in there and swishes it in. So if you really want to basically format your text so that things appear or are marked up in a certain way, you would do something like this. We're not going to be doing a lot of like literature or poetry or novels or anything like that, so we would have no need to do this. Or even in fiction, you don't normally have like start lines and end lines. You just let the text basically flow through until it hits some kind of stop, whether it's the browser's dimensions or the device or whatever. But just to give you an idea, so when you're typing up, just to go back to the other one, usually if I'm marking something up, you can throw a carriage return in there, but if it's data, which you're not going to have that much in, just say we had just this. Usually I'll go ahead and have the end tag right there. I try not to do stuff like this and have the data hanging out there. And as we get into this more, especially after your first homework assignment, you'll get the flow, sort of the feel and flow of this kind of thing. But anyways, just to be mindful of it. Once you get used to it, sometimes it's easier just doing it rather than trying to talk about it. But that is a difference between HTML and XML. Another thing that we won't talk too much about, but the Goldberg does talk a little bit about in Chapter 1, is something called CData. CData is basically character data. It's not parsed character data, it's just character data. And what this is used for predominantly, at least in his examples and how you might see it out in the sort of professional world, would be if you're trying to, and this is kind of confusing, but if you're wanting to, in your XML document, actually mark up XML syntax, which we do not do in this class, but that is a reason you'd use CData. And what it essentially does is it just tells the parser, ignore this. This is not XML code that you're going to need to do. It's merely for showing someone, in their marked up data, they might have, their little name tag thing there, and something like that. And to make sure that even if I had a misspelled or an illegal XML tag like that, it would just totally ignore it. The long and short of this is you can know what CData is for the purposes of reading the book, but we are not going to use it in any homeworks, exercises. It's not going to be in a test, and I don't expect you to know about it, but I just wanted to address it because he does bring it up, and it can be a little confusing just to see it and then have me not even talk about it in class. So that's what CData is. No big deal, but we're not going to really use it too much. Attributes are something that you need to know about. And attributes are an interesting way to mark up information. Attributes are always used with an element, so they basically are a way to designate information about the element. They're essentially used as element metadata. It's data about data, if you will, contained in the element. You need to know how to use them, and you will be using them regularly, but not that much in any one document, so you want to use them sparingly or use them with some kind of discretion. Typically, you might think of an attribute as something that only the creator would use, and the consumer or the user of the document might not necessarily see it. So let's take an example here that I like to use, which is an engine size. We have angled quotes there. You want straight up quotes in your XML documents. We have engine, right? That's our element. And then I'm just going to take this out so we can talk about it so you can see it a little closer. So here we have engine 3.2. Doesn't really tell you a lot of what that is. What I hope you're guessing is that's the size of the engine. But a way to basically clarify or give more definition, if you will, to the element you're using. An attribute is very handy for doing that, and it's essentially data about data. It's like a metadata, a piece of metadata. So in here, I'm just going to paste that back in. And what we have here is the attribute name, which is size. We set it equal to whatever value we want to put in there. It could be liters, 3.2 liters. It could be in inches, and this figure would have to be, this would be a tiny car if it's 3.2, and what we would do is do cubic inches, and it might be something like this. Oh. My old Ford LTD was what was that? 302, I think, if I could type. 302 cubic inches. So anyways, what the point is an attribute basically gives clarity to this element that we're using. We'll see it in other places. You might have, say, something like our first example that we looked at. We might have something like this, and do something like, you know, it might be just a number. If I could spell. Again, kind of basic, but here we could have an ID system for each book. This is not as good as the other one, but it's just, I wanted to show you how attributes work. So you have a attribute name, and you set it equal to some value that's in here, and it could be a number, or it could be a name. It can have spaces in there. Might be probably better to do something like that. Instead of having the word split up. In fact, I think it might give you, the parser might give you some problems if you try to not have a, if you have a space in there. I think it wants you to have some character in there. So attributes, we use them, they're always inside of an element, and they're essentially metadata, so they're extra data about the tag that you're using to mark up your information. Naming conventions, we already talked about that a little bit. There's camel case, there's, you know, you can have everything in uppercase or lowercase. Again, my convention is to have everything in lowercase, as I've been doing here, and if you need to have a space, just use an underscore. Comments are very important. Comments are a way that help us mark up our code. Let's go back here to, I'm going to grab our Neil Young example, throw that on here, and say I want to add some comments to this. What I do is and this is like why, again, you can't use some of these special characters just anywhere you want, because the parser basically uses those to figure out like what you're trying to tell it to do. So here I want to do a comment, and I might say something like, I don't know, following code for musician information, something like that. And that's how you always end it up. If I wanted to comment out, that's an expression that Goldberg uses. You can do something like delete that, and then down here I can go like that, and this whole area will be commented out if I do that. That means that the parser will not read it. And not so much for the first homework assignment or first couple, but when we get later in the course, the assignments get a little bigger and more complicated. Sometimes you'll get one part of your assignment working, but you can't the other. This is a good way to use comments to comment out what you've written, and that way the program or the application or the document you're working on will run, and then just basically skip over the part that's your problem code. So comments are very good. Another thing that I expect you to do in this class is to use comments at the top of your homework assignments, or really any assignment for that matter, exercises. And how you can do that is something like this. And I'll probably show you this again, but you would do something like this. Something like that. You might even throw this in there. Anyways, you would put comments in and put your name, and I'll show this to you again, but that's another reason why comments are used. It's a very common thing in a programming course to put your name in the actual programming assignment, because after you look at several of them, they can start to all look the same. So a name is very handy, and it's handy for you. It's a good thing to get in the habit of doing. The XML declaration is another one that every XML document requires. So I'm going to go and open up one of the ones that we were working on earlier. Here we have our book XML document we're creating. This needs an XML declaration. And this is something that what I advise you doing is just copy it. You can copy it from one of my examples. I'll post this so you have it. Just grab this guy, right click on it and copy it, and when you're creating a new a new document, just paste it right in there. Don't try to type it out by hand, because I can just guarantee you at one point or another, it may not be the first time you try it, but the second or third time, or you're having a bad day and you'll just miss something. And the application is very poor at picking up errors in this declaration, because this is sort of the Uber statement, if you will, or it's the statement saying that this is an XML document, and if it can't even get past that, it'll never tell you any errors that you have in here. And the error it gives you up here for something, say if you did this, or if that was misspelled, or that was misspelled, it just won't tell you. And there might be something out on the web that can find an error like that, but it's just best to paste it in and go that way. Another thing to do too, if you're doing copying and pasting, and this is something else that you can just kind of learn as you move along in this class, but if you're going to copy, say, out of a PDF or a Word document or even something off the web, it's always handy to have Notepad, because Notepad is just your plain editor, and it'll essentially strip away any kind of funny encoding that's in there. So for example, if I were to get this off the web, which I didn't, I just got it on my editor, but say I got it off the web, it never hurts just to type it in there. It's been stripped of any kind of encoding, and plop it in your editor, and then you know you've got nice and clean code that does not have any kind of funny gremlins or I don't know what words to use for them, but basically they're different encoding standards, and we don't really talk about it too much in this class, but there's all sorts of encoding standards, and you don't want those in there. Microsoft Word adds a lot of funny stuff, so sometimes if you're having a problem, that's how we got those angled quotes in there. That was a different encoding. So anyways, XML declaration, there's 1.0 and 1.1. Either one of those will work. I just leave it at 1.0. You can have as little as this. You don't have to put that in there. As long as you have that, it'll still run this encoding definition as UTF-8, and basically what that allows for is all sorts of character sets to use, and essentially tells the parser what character set you're using. For the purposes of this course, I'll never have you change that or use a different one. As I showed you here, there are many different ones. Occasionally in this course, a student will copy and paste from something on the web, and they'll get a document that has different encoding specs in it, or encoding standards. And so what sometimes I'll do is just highlight everything and go into here and set it to UTF-8, and it's fine. But we'll deal with those problems when it comes up, and usually 2 or 3 times in the course of the semester that comes up. Let's talk about parsers just for a minute. The parser is what reads the XML document. There are many parsers out there, and they can read XML in a slightly different way depending on what parser you're using. Notepad++ has its own parser in it when we're checking to see if the code is legal. But again, each one will parse it differently. So if you look at an XML document, say on Netscape, Chrome, or Firefox, that's all kind of one family of browsers that all have a parser inside them. It might look one way, or it might sort of consider it legal, or it may consider it illegal, depending. Well-formed is the other word. IE is another parser out there, Internet Explorer. If you open it up in IE, it might parse it a little differently or look at it a little differently. And Safari is another one. That's the Apple browser. Again, not all browsers are created equal. The main thing to know here is that IE is sort of in one family of browsers. It's a family of one, and it's Microsoft. And then we have essentially all the rest of the browsers. And the thing that's, I guess, the distinguishing characteristic between these two families is Netscape, which we don't use anymore, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, really, Opera. I don't know. I think there's a couple other ones out there, but I doubt any of you all are using them. But if you are, so you know, those are all W3C based browsers. So that means they follow the W3C consortium's recommendations on web standards, XML standards, and so forth, and how they build their parser. IE, on the other hand, Microsoft, I used to beat up on them a lot, but I understand why they will decide to not follow a W3 standard, and part of that is that it allows them to enhance their applications, because what Microsoft is in the business of is software, not really devices in the way that Apple is. So it's always had a reason to try to enhance their applications as much as possible. So for example, if you're to check your email, you're using some version of Hotmail, which is a Microsoft product, and how it's presented to you on IE versus, say, Google or Safari or any of the other W3C browsers, it's going to be a much more enhanced experience when you're on IE versus any of the other browsers, because it's a Microsoft product and they're very biased towards their own applications. So anyways, that's kind of a long-winded story. Not all browsers behave the same. They all have their own parsers in them, and that's something we'll just have to be aware of as we go through the course. The other thing that we're going to look at is something called predefined entities. And I've already talked about some of these. These are things like this. Here I just pasted them on there. We've got a ampersand. That's an ampersand. We've got a less than sign, greater than sign, quotation mark. Again, it should be up and down. And then a single quotation mark, which should be straight up and down. These are all what you might consider sort of reserved characters. They're characters, as I mentioned before, that the parser uses and what the XML standard uses to write out XML. So they're not really fair game to use as is, because we use, as we know, a less than sign to create a tag, a greater than sign to create a tag, the quotation marks to designate where our attribute values go, and we will use ampersands eventually. You'll see those. So what we do to essentially take care of that problem is we have a list of references that we use. And let's see if I can clean this up. There we go. And I'll just plop those back in our editor here and look at them. Okay, so what we have here are all of our symbols that we want to use. And instead of using those symbols, again, this is when we're writing data. So if I wanted to, say, create a tag that looks something like this, and it's something like this, and say Wolf and Sons. Oh. And close it out, enter, bam. Okay, so we have it. Okay, so when you see how that's highlighted blue there, what Notepad++ is telling us, and what the parser actually in the end is telling us, is that, oh, that's XML that you're doing there. That's not data. This should all be data in there. And so that will be illegal. If I run that through a parser to see whether I've used legal XML or not, this is going to create an error. So to take care of that, what I do is just merely type it out, or I can copy it in there. And what you'll see here is typically these predefined entity references tend to start or have some not start, they have some kind of abbreviation of the thing that they're the shortcut, if you will, or the code. It has the thing that you're the entity reference that you're using, that's inside of this little code, if you will. So here we have the ampersand, and then we have amp. So that's pretty easy to remember. And then they always end with a semicolon. Again, if I wanted to say, I don't know, Wolf was greater than Sons, it's not going to squawk there for whatever reason, but we would still need to use a greater than sign, do something like that. So again, it's ampersand GT for greater than, semicolon. Here we have ampersand LT for less than. Get rid of that. Oh. Again, ampersand for ampersand, apos for apostrophe, and then quote or quat for quotation mark. These are things that all of those usually show up on a test, so that's something you'll want to know about and be versed in, and then obviously be aware of it when you're creating your documents, because they can become a real hassle for you when you're doing your XML documents. So I'm just going to copy in paste in a completed document here. In fact, I'm going to do, and then I'm just going to go back to where we started out. In fact, I'm just going to X this out. No, I can open it back up if I want to have it there, and yeah, there we have that. We're going to create a new document here. I'm just going to paste that in. I want to show you how to do this. So we're going to save this. This is new. Remember, it's red there. I'm just going to go into week 2 and give it a name. So how about we'll do just a, I don't know, first XML doc, something like that. First XML, and then As I mentioned before, in another tutorial, we need to scroll down. I just need to bring this guy over a little bit more. Scroll down, all the way down. It's always the second one from the last. We'll choose that for our save as type, and then we have extensible markup language, or XML. So you click on that and it'll just slap a .xml on the end of that. Not really nuts about having XML written twice there, so we'll just say first document .xml, and then we're going to save it. And so the blue, that means it's been saved. We're in XML now. What we might do now is I'm just going to highlight everything and go and do a pretty print. Again, this is only for me just to be able to look at, okay, there's an error detected. Alright, so let's see what that is. We're going to go to XML Tools and check XML syntax now. Okay, so there's a parsing error at line 5. Okay, so what I did here was I just copied this in from a Microsoft Word document, and this is a great little time to learn this. I'm just going to do that. Do you see how it goes straight up? And then that one, and it wants to put an extra quote in just to help me out. So let's go back and first see if I have legal XML syntax. No error detected. And now I can go in and do my pretty print, and it fixes things up pretty nicely here. I got my put comments here. Again, I could put my name in here, and you can see that comments come in green. If I do a carriage return, anything in here is going to be green, as you can see. So I could put you know, today's date, whatever it might be, the class it is, and maybe something like homework 4 or whatever. So there I have my first XML document. I have my declaration up here. Usually you'll see yellow there. I have my root node or root tag. That's going to be there. Do not put your comments before the declaration. It always has to be after that. This has to be the first thing that the parser sees, because that's what tells it that, oh, this is a .xml, or excuse me, this is an XML document, and I will treat it as such. Again, you can see how the tags kind of map out here. If we have a node, you can close it like that, you know, with children inside of it, and you can close the whole thing up. It's not really that handy, but that's what those are there for. It basically shows you what level you're on in the document. That's that. That's your first XML document. You'll save it, and that's pretty much all you need to know for your plugins here. You're going to use check XML syntax to see if you have legal XML, and that's what you're going to spend most of your time doing on your first homework assignment. Again, I just made it illegal, and you can see that they don't go purple there. Those do, that doesn't. So if I go here, XML Tools, check XML syntax. Here I have an error at line 12. Click OK, and go to line 12 and look in here, and it's like, oh, okay, that was the problem. Save it, and you'll go back to plugins. And you'll be doing this quite a bit in the course, because that's how you make sure you have legal XML.